This is my bakery.
My name is Janice. I'm 29 years old, and if you walked past my bakery at 6 o'clock on a winter morning, you would swear. The air itself had learned how to be warm. Cinnamon and butter make their own weather. Sugar turns into sunlight when it hits the right heat. I know this because I grew up measuring hope in teaspoons and degrees fall. Fahrenheit while everyone else around me measured life in pay stubs, square footage, and practical plans. My father, a construction man with hands like brick and a voice like a tape measure snapping shut, believed in things he could stack and invoice. My mother, a secretary who could alphabetize noise itself, believed the safest dreams were the ones that stayed in their folders. And my older bro, Isaac grease under his nails, loud opinions in his mouth, believed that if it didn't rattle like an engine, it wasn't real work. I believed in dough that rose in the dark. Here is a picture of girlhood, if you'll have it. A 6-year-old standing on a chair, talking to yeast like it's a stubborn friend, waiting for bubbles to appear as proof that faith is not foolishness. Later, a teenager, elbows dusted white at midnight while her classmates slip out the door to parties. They will have photos by morning. I will have the first edible attempt at a croissant, NT that doesn't feel like edible origami. Even later, a young woman announcing at dinner that she's been accepted to culinary school, and the table turns to stone. That's not an educa. Tie-in, my father says in the same tone he uses for weather reports. And broken tools, so you're opening a cookie stand. Isaac laughs through mashed potatoes, the way a person laughs when he thinks. Jokes are a form of leadership. My mother smiles like a caution. Sign, sweetheart, frosting is lovely on a birthday, but not on a life. You should know that I did not argue. I ate. I washed dishes to pay for flour, folded laundry to pay for butter, sold cupcakes out of a trunk while pretending the wind was applause. I ruined more pies than I sold. I learned to fail fast, to start earlier. To stay with the oven like it was a radio that would tell me the truth if I listened long enough. When my farmer's market money went from $18 to $40 to $80 to $200, I saw something that number S are not always kind enough to show. A slope. That's all a life is, really, a set of slopes you teach to tip toward the future. When I signed a tiny lease downtown, a corner spa, see, just big enough for 2 ovens and a display case, only people who came to the soft opening were strangers who had been waiting for the smell. My parents said to call when I got a real job. I called the landlord instead to ask if I could paint the walls a color called sunshine. If this were a simple story, it would be enough to tell you that I worked until dawn and the lines formed like a chorus, and my ledger stopped wheezing and started breathing. But success is sugar, it doesn't only sweeten. It draws. Isaac started visiting the shop. At first it was nothing, a grin, a free coaf. Fee poured as if he were spilling generosity instead of my margins. Then the pronouns arrived. Our bakery, he said to a customer, and the words fell like a greasy fingerprint on glass. A week later, he was rearranging shelves like he was the architect of pastry. He showed up late on a Saturday, the busy day, smelling like a bar's last call and promising a wedding cake I hadn't agreed to make. I told him quietly that there was no we here, not in the way he meant. He stared at me the way people stare at lab results they don't like. Ungrateful, he said, and I could hear my mother's voice warming up in the distance, the way an instrument clears its throat. That Sunday, the trap wore a roast chicken like a costume. Family business, my mother said, as if naming it could make it true. My father nodded like a foreman counting beans. The script had been written without me. Isaac had helped build my little shop and now deserved recognition. 50-50, M. Why, father declared in the confident tone of a man splitting a bill he didn't pay. I looked at all 3 of them and saw not faces but claims. It is a strange feeling, the moment you realize that people you love are looking at your life the way surveyors look at land. I told them no, The words landed like a plate shattering. Ungrateful, they said. Selfish. Isaac leaned back in his chair the way cheap kings lean back on borrowed thrones and said, "She come around." I did not come around. I went upstairs to my tiny apartment and cried in the honest way, which is not delicate. Crying can be lit. E-weather that finally breaks over a drought. It can be like a volcano that has been swallowing its own fire for years. When I was empty, I brewed coffee and did what I have always done. Made a plan. People think baking is improvisation, but the truth is that it's law, ingredients, measurements, timing, and the humility to listen to heat. Revenge, it turns out, isn't so different, except the oven is the part of you that refuses to be stolen from. Before the courtroom, there would be the ledger. Before the judge, there would be the paper. Before your honor, a vows. And little exhibits no one else thought mattered. Receipts. Shift logs. Deposits that only made sense if you knew the smell of a Saturday rush. I will tell you everything the nights I spent cataloging. What had vanished in round numbers. The way a cash drawer remembers who opened it. And when. The way a town can keep a secret while also telling you what you need to hear if you're patient and key. ND, I will tell you about Diana, an accountant with the gentlest eyes and a prosecutorial mind, who turned my suspicion into a pattern. About Natalie at the credit union, who didn't show me what she couldn't but told me what it meant that a shadow account glowed the morning after my biggest sales. I will tell you about cameras and how a lens does not care about the story you wanted to tell. Oh no. Why the one you gave it. I will tell you about how, when men say family business, they sometimes mean your labor, my dividend. But first, understand this. I did not start a bakery in order to stand in a courtroom. I started a bakery because I wanted to make something with my hands that made other people's morning softer. The courtroom came to me like winter comes to a town that isn't. Tea ready slow. Then all at once, when the day arrived, my apron was off, my hands were steady, and the folder on my lawyer's table was thick enough to be its own kind of architecture. Isaac W. Often like a man who expected a coronation. My parents sat behind him, proud of the crown they had carved out of my hours. They did not know what the heat had made of me. If you've ever been laughed at for saying your dream out loud, if you've ever watched your own family measure you with a ruler meant for someone else, if you've ever decided to stop asking for permission from people who benefit when you never get going, then you know why I'm telling you this. Follow me from the kitchen light to the witness stand, from a Sunday ambush to a gavel that learned the smell of cinnamon before I pass the first exhibit. Across that polished wood, let me show you the cost of learning to rise in the dark. I like to think the first thing I ever learned to love was a living thing yeast, not the puffed braggart it becomes in the oven, but the shy, invisible creature that wakes up only if you treat it with respect. At 6, I learned patience by staring into a measuring cup, waiting for the beige water to grow a crown of bubbles. At 15, I learned endurance by starting over after another batch of croissants shattered like plates when I tried to fold them wrong. At 18, I learned privacy, because it is nearly impossible to explain to people who love you that starting a life at midnight with flour up to your elbows feels saner to you than sleeping. None of this looked like intelligence. To my family, it looked like stubbornness in an apron. When the oversized envelope came with the culinary school crest, I set it on the dinner table as if it were a bouquet. The silence that followed was not confusion, it was choreography. My father took the letter, read the first line, and exhaled like a man who had been hoping for bad weather to prove his point. That's not education, he said, each word a brick laid across the road, paying someone to teach you to cook. My mother brought out the smile she keeps for slippery floors. Sweetheart, baking is a lovely hobby, but no one builds a future out of frosting. Isaac didn't even look up at first. When he did, he smirked. So, what's the plan, Jan? A cookie stand. That line has lived a long life in my head. I do not hate him for it. I hate what it stood on, the laziness of the world's favorite shorthand for women's work. I didn't argue. By then I had started to understand the limits of language with people who imagine competence as something that rattles, roars, or lifts an engine block. Instead, I got a second part-time job. I washed dishes until my hands were raisins, folded laundry until I could match socks by sound, and cut costs everywhere that didn't carry butter in its bones. The bakery jar on my dresser earned a territory in the room. My rent, tea, my sleep, my breath, everything been around it. On weekends, I loaded the trunk with cupcakes that leaned into every weather mood our town could throw at them. Wine chimes of spatulas in the back seat, a cooler full of frosting, sweating like a novice. $8 an hour if you measured it wrong. Something closer to a future if you kept your eye on the slope. At the farmer's market, the air liked to pretend it was kind. Mornings felt gentle. Afternoons bit. My first day, I made $18 and a friend who said, I don't even like sweets, but this tastes like my GR. And Mother's Kitchen, that felt like courtesy. Second week, I brought twice as much and still ran out before noon. Third week, I learned to price without apologizing. My ledger went from flinching to raw bone. Janice, $18, $40, $80, $200. The numbers didn't shout. They nodded, like the town itself was clearing its throat before considering me. Behind the scenes, I ruined more pies than I sold, but each failure carried a small curriculum. Though that split reminded me to rest it. Burnt bottoms taught me that temperature is the instrument, not the song. Day after day, the table on W. Hitch I rolled pastry became a topographic map of my mistake stints where I had learned not to lean too hard on hope. I signed my first lease with a pen that felt heavier than it looked. The downtown corner we could afford was more quarter than room, 2 ovens, 1 display case, a window that believed in morning light, and a sink that groaned like an old man when you asked for more. Ray, the landlord, asked if I wanted the walls white. I asked for a color named Sunshine and painted it myself because I needed the space to glow even when the weather refused. I invited my parents to the soft opening. They didn't come. My father said to call when I had a real job, as if a payroll you write with your own breath is pretend. I don't tell you this to make them villains. They were simply fluent in a different language, the dialect of ours tracked on a foreman's clipboard, the grammar of benefits and bosses. What I was building had neither. De-risk, a register that would sometimes cough rather than open, flour on the floor like snow no one shovels because it is all part of the same storm. Small towns have a sense for experiments. They tilt their heads, they squint, and then they decide. On our first Monday, a line formed by 6:15, I didn't think of it as success. I thought of it as proof that memory has a smell, chinamo, and braided itself into people's schedules. Coffee learned to speak to strangers. I started to know regulars by the shape of their coat shoulders, by the way they hesitated before choosing a scone like they were pie. Sking a small future, I kept a ledger that breath, the kind that doesn't make you check your balance every hour to see if you still exist. At night I went upstairs to my tiny apartment and fell asleep in the sound of cooling ovens, a noise that resembles relief if you've learned to hear it. I should have known that visibility isn't free if you want the cultural pie. See, here it is. The town rolled out a warm dish for reliable trades and a paper napkin for creative work. The men who poured concrete were called providers. The women who iced cakes were called cute. The school board loved bake sales but didn't trust a woman who wanted to turn sugar into a mortgage. Some of it was about gender. Some of it was about fear, even the loving kind that pretends to protect you by narrowing your choices to the width of a paycheck. My mother didn't wake up wanting to shrink me. She woke up wanting me not to drown in something she couldn't count, but cardio. And when it grows large enough, starts to look like a fence with no gate. People call you irresponsible when your plan doesn't look like their nostalgia. Here is the other piece no one says out loud. Success. Where's perfume? It brings visitors. First came the curious, then the loyal, then I should have recognized the smell of the opportunist. The exact week my baker's forearm stopped aching as if I had borrowed them from a stranger, Isaac started to drop. By the first time, I was too tired to notice the PR script he carried in his pocket. He poured himself coffee as if generosity were self-serve. He leaned on the counter and told a customer, "Our bakery is doing great," and I felt something minor and greasy slide across the glass of my life. I wiped it away with a cloth, but the print remained, not a smudge you can clean, but a shape you begin to see everywhere. Isaac came the next week, and the next. He rearranged shelves, promised a wedding cake I had an acre, ate two, and arrived late with breath that smelled like last night. When I asked him, soft as I could, what we meant, his face changed posture. "Mom and Dad are gonna lose it," he said, and the sentence carried a strange relief. Now I knew where the storm would come from. Between those drops and the downpour, there was the ordinary grace of early mornings, the dote that lifted like a good apology. The way the first customer's thank you warmed my hands. I lived in those hours because I suspected the others would try to take them. My refusal to be annexed didn't come from cruelty. It came from the simple math of what I had paid. Every failure I had cataloged, every $18 morning that I didn't call proof of futility, every stretch of loneliness where the only voice ring for me was the event telling me the truth. These were my equity. People think equity is a word for investors. I think it's a word for anyone who has measured out their life in atom. PTS. Sunday would bring the ambush, but that belongs to a later page. For now, hold this image. A woman who has learned to rise in the dark, stalking a display case that looks like a row of small, edible second chances, glancing at the door as the bell rings, and no butter endless. I woke at 3:58, beat the alarm to its own job, and went straight to lamination. The mixer hummed like a contented animal. The first tray of croissants looked like rows of small men's exhaling. By 6, the glass fogged at the corners from the warmth inside meeting the stubborn cold outside. A physics lesson that always felt like proof that two worlds could touch without fighting. Orders stacked in my head. A dozen raspberry danishes for Mrs. Kellogg, gluten-free lemon bars for the PTA fan, and a 3-tier chocolate cake I had agreed to under the condition that the bride trusted my handwriting. I had the day mapped down to the minute, which is to say I had set up a fragile truce between ambition and time. Isaac arrived 2 hours late with yesterday on his breath. His smile was performative, the kind people put on like a reflective vest before entering a zone they know they shouldn't be in. "Big day for us," he said, as if the word had always had an extra person attached. He slid behind the counter without washing his hands and started greeting every customer like he was an elected official back. Slaps, inside jokes, the kind of loud friendliness that tries to exchange noise for legitimacy. He rearranged the case, changed the order of scones as if gravity had a moral preference, and promised a custom cake pickup at noon I hadn't agreed to. By 10, my schedule had been chased into the alley and mugged. "Isaac," I said quietly when the line thinned, because the middle of a rush is no place for a family war. "What's this wee business?" He blinked with theatrical bafflement, then let the hurt bloom in his voice like a practiced bruise. "Wow," he said. "Yo, you really are ungrateful." He stared around the shop as if compiling evidence of my ingratitude in the existence of any success at all. "Mom and Dad are gonna lose it when they hear how you talk to family." The sentence was a flare revealing the rest of the plan. I could see the choreography that would follow, the dinner invitation, the high-minded opening statements about family and fairness, the pre-decided conclusion dressed up as compromise. I cleaned the counter with deliberate calm, counted the till, and felt something settle in me that was heavier than anger and colder than fear. "Yo, you can fight wind with more wine, or you can lay brick." I chose brick. The invitation came disguised as kindness. Come Sunday, my mother said on the phone, her voice turning syrupy at the corners. We'll make your favorite, roast chicken. As if protein could broker peace, I brought a pie because manners are not the same thing as surrender. When I arrived, the house had been staged. Candles, the good plates, the kind of cheerfulness that comes from people who have already decided what you will say. Isaac sat at the table like a man presiding over his own celebration. My father had the look of a foreman inspecting a job site he intended to take over. Dinner tasted like waiting. The conversation hopped from weather to the neighbor's new fence to the price of eggs. The CH. Iken arrived and was carved with solemnity, as if slicing meat were a sacrament. When plates were full and cutlery had made its first music, my mother placed her fork down with an exactness that felt like a cue. Janice, she began, and the air shifted. We need to talk about how you're treating your brother. My father nodded, eyes on me, voice steady. Isaac's been helping you build that little business, he said, little as if it were a term of endearment rather than a measure. He deserves recognition. The word landed on the table between us like an extra dish no one had asked for. I breathed in and kept my tone quiet, because the volume of a truth does not change what it is. He's come by sometimes, I said. I've paid him for the help. Family helps family. My mother cut in with that sharpness she only used when she was certain she was standing on the moral high ground. And when family helps build something, they deserve a share. My father leaned back in his chair and delivered the verdict with the confidence of a man who has never had to justify his confidence. He deserves a partnership. 50-50. That's fair. 50-50 for carrying flour. 50-50 for arranging shelves and telling my customers what we would make. 50-50 for being an older brother in a world that still believes seniority is synonymous with entitlement. I looked at their faces and felt something inside me align, like the moment a pastry finally finds the shape it was supposed to hold. They did not see me, they saw potential yield. They did not hear how many trays I had burned learning to listen. How many $18 days I refused to call proof that I was foolish. They saw a profit center that could be brought under family management. It is a particular loneliness, the kind where you sit at your parents' table and realize you have become inventory. No, I said. The plate on the far end of the table clinked. A small, accidental punctuation. I'm not giving up half my business. Ungrateful. My mother spat. The word finding me the way certain words have homing devices. Selfish, my father added, not with rage. Boo. Tea with the tired disappointment of a man whose script had been interrupted. Isaac leaned back like a cheap monarch on a borrowed throne. It's fine, he said with a smile calibrated for magnanimity. Ty, I'll keep helping for now. She come around once she realizes how much she needs me. I cleared the table because I was raised to do it. Even after sentences like that, I rinsed plates while my mother told me in the next room that I was making this harder than it needed to be. My father pretended to look for a game on TV he never watches. Isaac texted someone a string of laughing emojis. I set the pie on the counter untouched and went home. My apartment above the bakery has thin walls and an honest floor. When I shut the door, the day shook itself off me like a wet dog, and I cried the way a storm finally lets go over a town that has been praying for rain. Crying is unglamorous. It redacts you until only the necessary lines remain. When the water stopped, I brewed coffee, sat at my small table, and took out a notebook. People think I'm a romantic because I talk to yeast. But I am a scientist by temperament and a bookkeeper by survival. I titled a page, What I Know. Under it, I listed facts the way a baker lists ingredients, the drawer records who opens it, and when. The shortages happen in round numbers. The shortages happen when Isaac works the front. Natalie K. Now's where the money goes without showing me. Where it goes, Diana will know what the pattern means. The law respects paper, not sentiment. I wrote LLC and underlined it until the paper thin. I wrote the names of my suppliers and drew lines between them and the contracts we had by handshake that needed to be coming. I wrote recipes and next to it trade secrets, because things of the heart sometimes need the armor of legal language to make the world take their pulse seriously. I wrote cameras, because an eye that doesn't blink is not a betrayal, it is CL. Arity, I wrote wages paid to Isaac, because I had receipts, and receipts are a form of weatherproofing. I wrote soften, because I would need to pretend to yield to buy time without actually, sir. Entering an inch, people imagine revenge as heat. They are wrong, it is temperature control. It is knowing that if you open the oven door too soon, collapse will teach you humility you didn't. T asked for, so I planned, I would form the LLC. I would document ownership of everything I had built. I would upgrade the POS to track not just transactions but fingerprints. I would install a camera with an unblinking view of the cash register. I would ask Diana to audit quietly. I would speak at family gatherings in the gentle subjunctive maybe, perhaps, we'll see until Venus rose and set into something that could stand on its own. I would let Isaac believe he was winning, because sometimes the only way to show a lie its own face is to hand it a mirror in time. At 2:17 a.m., I closed the notebook. The ovens below me ticked as they cooled. A sound I have always loved because it means the work of heat is done. I pressed my palms to the table and felt how solid wood can be when you need something that does not move. Tomorrow I would open at 6. People would line up and ask for what sweetness they needed to make their day bearable. I would hand it to them. And I would keep a ledger a judge could love. The first discrepancy was small enough to hide inside a busy day. $12 gone missing after a Saturday rush, the kind of amount you can low. SE in a miscounted stack of fives if your hands are sugared and your brain is thinking in timers and oven doors. I told myself a story about fatigue. I told myself another one about kindness people. In a hurry, and I forgot to record. A compscone to a teacher who looked like she was carrying the whole school by the handle. The second shortfall arrived the next weekend, NTH. Either the weekend after that, they had a shape. Round numbers that look neat on paper and wrong in the mouth. Loss, I learned, is messy when it's on its ... I started staying late to CL. Oaths the drawer myself. I counted out loud. The way you do, when you want the room to watch you be careful. I began logging who touched the register and when. Old school, in a notebook, because sometimes a notebook humiliates a liar more than software does. Still, the numbers dipped on the days Isaac worked the front. Correlation, a voice in me said, is not causation. Another voice, the one that keeps the ovens on its head. But it's where you start. I upgraded the pause. The new system tracked every login, every void, every time the cash drawer opened like a mouth and closed like a secret. I didn't announce the change because I was not building a trap. I was building a record that would stand when the wind showed up pretending to be opinion. I told myself, if it's no body, then we will have proof that it's no body, and I will sleep without this stone in my stomach. If it's somebody, we will have proof there, too. The pattern held. The drawer stayed short when Isaac worked. The withdrawals and the debit machine matched. The cash-out sheet wore a little dip where honesty should have been. I tried to imagine him needing money so badly he couldn't meet my eyes with it. I tried to imagine that desperation. What I saw instead was entitlement with a new mask. Not hunger, but habit. Not survival, but a story where your sister's effort is a communal pantry. I confronted him the way you confront a family member when you still want the world to be simple. I'm seeing shortages, I said, in a voice that did not want to accuse. There have. Ending on days you're here. He flinched theatrically, then pasted on her until it looked like a face. Are you seriously accusing me of stealing? He said, borrowing the older brother tone that says my outrage is Evie. Dense, I'm your family. I'm here helping you build this business for practically nothing, and this is what you think of me. The room fell for it for half a second. Even I did, the way you do when the word family shows up like a badge and you realize how often you've been trained to salute. I apologize for the tone I hadn't used. I said we should both be careful. He nodded like a man who has just been cleared of a crime he committed. Small towns know how to keep a confidence and how to send a signal. Natalie and I have known each other since we traded stickers and seekers on the third grade playground. She works at the credit union now, the one where I bank, and the one where Isaac would never think to keep his money because he believes the word credit is an insult. I stopped by to ask about a second merchant account because growth requires plumbing you can't see. We talked about interest rates and impulse buys. As I stood to leave, she said, carefully, the way you do when you are obeying the law and saving a friend at the same time. It's interesting how some deposits in town line up with certain big Saturdays. She didn't say names. She didn't show me anything. Law is law, but friendship is a compass even when you are forbidden to map. That night, I called Diana. She does taxes for people who sleep with their receipts under their pillow, and she reads ledgers lit. A radiologist read scans. She came after closing and spread my books across the table like a patient. We ran fingers along columns. We circled dates on the calendar. We compared pause extracts to payroll. As and camera timestamps, patterns emerged the way. Bruises do slowly, then purple and obvious. Over 8 months, nearly $12,000 had walked out of my drawer in increments small and to masquerade as human error. $12,000 isn't a fortune, it's a month of payroll. It's a second oven. It's the difference between feeling like you will survive winter and hoping the town stays hungry. We documented it like we were building shelter, photocopies, backups, chain of custody notes in the margins. The new register recorded who was logged in during each mistake. The camera I had installed a quiet, unblinking eye that watched the cash like a lighthouse got hands that didn't belong to customers. A slip of a bill notched into a pocket with the efficient why of a man who has convinced himself he deserves a tip on the way out. The footage didn't care about love. It didn't even care about me. It cared about the square of vision it owned and the truth that crossed it. The next Sunday, instead of roast chicken there was a stack out of words. I carried the evidence in a folder that felt heavier than the pie plate I brought as camouflage. I've found shortages. I told my parents in their living room, the news on mute behind them as if the world were practicing not to hear. They line up with the days Isaac works. We've tracked it. There are bank deposits that I stopped before I said what I couldn't legally say that look like the missing amounts. There's footage. My mother, who taught me not to cross-stir Ed's without looking both ways, decided not to look at all. You're being paranoid, she said, with the 0-degree kindness of someone who believes the word paranoid can cure you. Isaac wouldn't do that. He's family. My father leaned into doubt like it was a recliner. Running a business is complicated, he offered. Maybe you're not as good with numbers as you think. It is an old story, the one where a daughter's math is called emotion. I set the folder on the coffee table and did not open it because I knew what they would do with the paper. Pretend it was smoke, not fire. Isaac arrived a few minute days later, carrying the smug relief of a man who knows the jury. He sat at the edge of the chair like he owned gravity. Look, he said, palms up, voice oiled for negotiation. Maybe some money got mixed up. These things happen in family businesses. The solution isn't accusations. The solution is making this official. I said, though I knew the script. A partnership, he said, eyes bright with the confidence of a thief who has decided he is a donor. 50-50. You put my name on it. and we can straighten out any confusion. There it was, not just theft, but leverage, not just skimming, but extortion. My parents nodded, along as if he were reading from a manual called How Families Keep Power in the Blood. In another life, in a softer decade, I may have tried again to translate myself. In this one, I wrote the word no on a note inside my head and slid it across to the part of me that runs the ovens. We were in agreement. That night I didn't cry. There are tears that clear you out and tears that would only flood the floor you're about to build on. I chose dry. I called the Secretary of State's office first thing Monday and filed the paperwork for an LLC with my name alone. I inventoried every asset. Ovens, mixers, display case, recipes as trade secrets, supplier relationships, delivery schedules, insurance policies. I stapled receipts for every envelope of cash I had ever handed. Isaac with the notation help paid and the date. I printed out the merchant statements and circled the days the drawer came up short. T with the kind of neatness that makes a judge think you respect her time. I asked Diana to prepare an independent report, her letterhead like a shield. I wrote to my landlord and attached the LLC certificate and asked him to add the entity as tenant of record. I wrote to my insurance agent and did the same. Paper turned into scaffolding, scaffolding into a place to stand. And then I did something that NT against the entire animal of me. I softened. I let maybe into my sentences at family dinners. Maybe you're right, I told my mother when she tested the pairing. Eater for surrender. Isaac has been helpful. I nodded thoughtfully when he mentioned incorporating. I asked him what logo he envisioned for a future sign, and he smiled like a child picking out a crown. All the while, he camera watched. The pause remembered. The ledger breathed. I was not faking peace. I was buying time, the way you do when a cake looks perfect at 20 minutes and you know a gust of air will ruin it. When I did sleep, I dreamed of ovens with courtroom doors and gavels that smelled faintly of cinnamon. I woke before the alarm, rolled dough with an attention that -1 like prayer, and reminded myself that patience is not passivity, it is discipline, it is refusing to open the door before arrives the strength. The evidence would be ready soon, and when it was, I would take off my apron, put on a plain dress that looked like a statement, and carry into a quiet room the kind of truth that does not need to shout. Planning is the opposite of panic. It's the sound a heart makes when it turns into a metronome. I started with the flour and water step simple, exact, not up for debate. I filed the LLC, my name alone. The entity is real as the OV, and more durable than anyone's opinion. I listed assets like a person counting blessings she had to prove, the double-deck oven's serial numbers photographed, the mixer with a stubborn tilt that still needed, like a tireless animal, the display case that fogged slightly at the corners on cold mornings, the recipes I wrote as trade secrets in a binder labeled with a boring name because boring names survive. I asked my landlord to amend the lease from me the person to me the entity. I added the LLC to the insurance policy so that if anything burned, the only thing that turned to smoke would be W. Hat was meant to. Paper became scaffolding. Signatures, the bolds ... Then I moved to temperature control the evidence. The POS had already learned to keep a diary. I taught it to tell me to the second. We exported logs and printed them with timestamps wide enough to breathe. I replaced the camera with one whose lens could read the calendar on the counter if I needed it to. And I ollie net its view so that a hand sliding a bill into a pocket would be the kind of geometry even a tired judge could see without squinting. I kept the old footage on a hard drive, then backed it up. Twice. Once to the cloud and once to a USB I labeled like it was a specimen. I created a chain of custody notebook because truth is delicate in the wild and sturdier when leashed to process. Diane arrived 2 evenings a week after the last customer had gone home with a brown bag and a small sweetness for the next morning. We treated the ledger like an x-ray. Deposits, voids, drawer opens. Discounts, comps, we plotted them against calendar. Squares that were suddenly more than days. The anomalies were polite at first, then they lined up like soldiers. Round numbers missing when Isaac worked. Ed, deposits at a bank I did not use appearing. The next business day in amounts that rhymed with the drawer stutter. We didn't write stolen in the report. Diana wrote. Skimming pattern consistent with misappropriation during specific login. Sessions, accountants wage war with understatement. But numbers do not build a wall by themselves. They need story to mortar them. I started due. Humaning the human part, a spiral-bound notebook by. The phone with entries in my plainest handwriting. Isaac promised retier custom cake to Harper not approved. Isaac late. 12 a.m. left early. To 40 p.m. client Mr. Cross. Word of mouth via. PTA, not I logged every task he claimed to have done and whether it was done by someone with a name that wasn't his usual. Why me? I pulled screenshots of ad receipts from the months when he told. People he brought in all our customers. The truth was homelier, a $50 promoted post that netted 300 clicks. A stack of hand flyers. I left at yoga, a coupon taped to the library's bulletin board, with the librarian's blessing. I collected thank you notes with dates that predated Isaac's sudden vocation for pastry, a wall of small testimonies, the kind of things courts call pattern, and practice. Community is its own affidavit. I asked 3 farmers market originals, people who remembered my $18 days to write brief letters. When they first bought from me, when they first saw Isaac at the shop, whether they had ever been told he cool on the business. I didn't script them. The letters came back with details even I had forgotten. The morning my tent nearly blew away in a butcher held down the corner while I boxed cinnamon rolls with my teeth. The day I figured out the lemon curve ratio and 3 strangers hugged me because it tasted like their grandmother's kitchen. The first time Isaac showed up and introduced himself as co-founder, and someone stalled their order to come find me in the back end. Ask Sotovus, is that true? These letters were not law, but they were weather, and judges, contrary to legend, do look out the window. There is a line you cross when you stop hoping a conversation will save you. I crossed it, and bought to Tiny Audio. Recorders that could hide in a pocket like a secret you are finally ready to tell. I do not recommend recording without consent for sport. I recom, and it for self-defense when the people who declare you family use that word as a pry bar. What people say when they think they are winning is a kind of confession. Isaac bragged about deserving at least 60% once he forced the partnership he said force and laughed like the word was a party trick. My mother talked about how the bakery would finally support Isaac properly when his name was on the paperwork, as if my labor had always been a trust fund accruing for a son. My father discussed expanding with a loan in Isaac's name, since he lines be the business mind. I didn't interrupt. I asked them to explain their plan again, so that the recorder would capture it twice in case anyone later pretended the mic had lied. This is the moment or so. Mion will ask whether I still loved my family. I did, just not in a way they recognize. I loved them like you love a river, beautiful, dangerous, not to be confused with a road. I loved them enough to stop letting them mistake me for a bridge. There is a form of loyalty that is merely inertia. I have outgrown it. The loyalty I practice now involves locks, passwords, and neat files. I adjusted my posture at family gatherings. I spoke softly, as if the argument had finally worn me down, because narrative likes to eat its meals with a knife and fork. Maybe you're I said when my mother rehearsed the chorus. Isaac has been helpful. I asked Isaac what color he imagined for the new logo, as if I were inviting him to paint a future I would never let him own. He smiled, a boy's smile on a man's face. He took the bait because greed is a kind of hunger that blunts other senses. Meanwhile, I build a witness list. The florist next door who saw us. AC leave early most days and me take out trash at. Closing every night. The coffee roaster who'd been delivering beans at 5:30 a.m. since before Isaac learned what my hours were. The UPS driver who could testify that business licenses and contracts had always arrived under my name and were signed by my hand. The insurance agent who had spoken only to me. The landlord who had negotiated solely with Janice and had never once, in 5 site visits, met an owner named Isaac. I wasn't hoarding allies. I was weaving a net that could catch a dropping truth without letting. It smash. Diana assembled the findings with the care of someone packing a parachute she may have to wear herself. At the front of the binder, the LLC certificate. Behind it, the amended lease and insurance endorsements, a tab for payroll and wages paid to Isaac, checks and notations reading help paid, a tab for POS logs with a legend even a sleepy clerk could follow, a tab for camera screenshots with dates and timestamps, a tab for bank deposit, correlations summarized in the dry, devastating language of accounting, a tab of community letters, and, in a sealed envelope, a transcript of the recorded conversations with a note that counsel would advise on admissibility. The cover page read, Janice's kitchen, ownership clarification, and fraud documentation. Letters are aller. Jig to drama, they like nouns that do not bleed. When I finally felt the binder's weight in my hands, something in my chest relaxed that had been clenched for months. I made one more copy and put it in a safe deposit box I called a lawyer whose name I had from a neighboring bakery owner who had survived a partner gone vulve. Her name was Kayla Bidire, and she spoke like a person who keeps her words on leashes. She specialized in business, fraud and small business defense. She listened to me, then to Diana, then flipped through the tabs, occasionally marking a page with a sticky flag, like she was pinning down butterflies for display. We're not in a partnership dispute, she said at last. Voice cool as a steel bowl, we're in theft and attempted extortion. We'll seek a declaratory judgment on ownership, damages, interest, costs, and a restraining order. We will also make it very expensive for anyone to keep pretending this is about family. It could have ended there, with quiet filing and a court date emerging like a sunrise, but Isaac, true to form, wanted drama. He arrived at the bakery 2 days later, leaned on the counter he hadn't wiped down once in his life, and issued his ultimatum like a man ordering dessert. This has gone on long enough, he said. I want 50% ownership officially, or I'll have to explore other options. He smiled a smile I had cataloged in part 3 of my life. The one cheat kings wear when they think their throne is bolted to the floor. I met his eyes and felt no heat. You're right, I said, and even to me, my voice sounded like spring after a long, obedient winter. It's time to make this official. 3 days later, a process server handed him the papers. He was still smiling when he took them, because greed, like hope, is slow to understand. Courtrooms have their own weather. The air is conditioned into neutrality, as if justice prefers a precise temperature. I arrived 10 minutes early in a plain dress that looked like a statement, binder tucked against my ribs like a second spine. Kayla walked beside me with the calm of someone who sharpens knives for a living and never waves them around. The benches were half full the weekday audience of curiosity and civic duty. My parents entered first, faces arranged in the optimism of people who believe they are finally going to see tea. Air narrative notarized. Isaac followed, hair combed like an alibi, shirt new for a man who usually wore oil stains as uniform. He scanned the room, saw me, and lifted his chin, the way a cheat king pretends a throne is portable. The clerk called the case. Opposing counsel stood a court-appointed lawyer who spoke in a tone that suggested this would be easy, that family disputes are just paperwork looking for a pen. Your Honor, he began, this is a matter of formalizing an existing business partnership. My client has invested months of labor and brought significant value to his sister's bakery. We're seeking fair recognition, 50% ownership to reflect his contributions. He smiled, an exhibit of reasonableness, and sat. Caleb did not clear her throat. She simply stood and opened the binder to a page she had already memorized. Your Honor, she said, the defense frames this as a partnership dispute. It is not. It is theft, fraud, and attempted extortion. She slid the first exhibit across. The LLC certificate with my name alone, the lease amendment, the insurance endorsements. Ownership was never jointly held. There is no partnership to formalize. Opposing counsel objected to tone. The judge glanced up, the way a meteorologist checks the sky when someone insists the storm is just theater. Proceed, she said. Caleb placed the POS logs on the reel, pages that breath timestamps and legends. This register records who opens the drawer and when, she said, tapping the legend. Show. Retages occur in round numbers on dates when Mr. Isaac is logged in. At the counter, a second tap slid into view, camera stills with dates and times. These images show Mr. Isaac removing cash from the drawer and placing it in his pocket during those same shifts. The judge leaned forward, not far, just enough to signal, I can see the calendar on the counter in those frames. I can read the time. Next, Caleb said, and the word next altered the rooms. Oxygen, bank deposit summaries from an institution not used by my client. The amounts and timing correlate to the register shortages in a manner consistent with skimming. She didn't say stolen. She said correlate. Consistent. Accountants wage war with understatement. Good lotters borrow the weapon and keep the edge. Opposing counsel tried to SE speculation he began. Caleb slid a sealed envelope across. We also have recordings of Mr. Isaac describing his plan to force a partnership and claim 60% ownership with the assistance of their parents. We will defer to the court on admissibility, but for the record, counsel has reviewed transcripts. She laid down the contribution ledger, a chart of Isaac's actual hours approximately equals 6 per week over 8 months. 0 startup funds, 3 verifiable customers he had referred, versus my expenditures, advertising receipts, supplier contracts, and payroll linklet. Ink checks Isaac labeled help paid. Something gave in the other lawyer something like the lesson that arrives late and still insists on being counted as punctual. He tried to reframe, even if there were irregularities, he said, Mr. Isaac's time and effort. Compensation, Isaac cut in, loud enough to be recorded by accident. I do. Okay, some cash because she wasn't paying me what I deserved. I built that place too. I brought people in. Everyone knows that. He looked at the gallery for confirmation from a public that had not been invited to rehearse the yell. Ines, Caleb didn't bother to object. She turned a single page and read, flat as truth. On June 12th, Mr. Isaac worked 6:14 a.m. to 11:02 a.m. Promised an unapproved custom order. Left early. Drawer short. $80. Deposit at East River Bank. June 13th, $80. On July 3rd, shift 7:06 a.m. to 12:28 p.m. Drawer short. $120. Deposit July 5th, $120. On August 21st, she kept going. The ledge. As patience on her tongue, until the repetition did the work. Rage never could. The judge's expression tightened into that particular weather called consequence. My parents shifted on the bench behind him, their faces traveling from bright to gray by way of denial. At one point, my mother shook her head minutely, as if the gesture could edit a timeline by hand. My father stared at the seal on the wall like it owed him an explanation. The judge asked a few quiet questions about process, chain of custody, pause configuration, whether cameras had audio now, whether the first had paid Isaac for shifts, yes, receipts tab. She did not inquire about love, Law rarely does. Then she stacked the exhibits into a small, orderly mountain and spoke in a tone that had sanded every splinter off. Mr. Isaac, she Saw it, your claims of partnership are unsupported by any documentation or contribution consistent with ownership. The court finds no partnership, implied or otherwise. She turned to one page. The evidence. C supports a pattern of misappropriation. You will repay $12,000 to Ms. Janice, plus interest and court costs. She looked at Caleb. Restraining order, Kale. Be nodded. Granted, Mr. Isaac is barred from the premises of Janice's kitchen and from interfering with the business. Courtrooms are not built for applause. They are built for gravity. The gavel didn't. T sound like victory. It sounded like something heavy, placed exactly where it belongs. Isaac's face did a strange dance between injured and furious. People who have been told their whole lives that their wants are weather often take a forecast. Personally, he started to speak and his lawyer tugged his sleeve, the first useful thing the man did all morning. Behind him, my parents sat like to small winter trees in a wine they had not prepared for. No one stood. No one hugged anyone. The room exhaled us back into the hallway, where fluorescent lights try to imitate daylight and fog. And relief shows up in the body as a sudden appetite for water. Kayla pressed my hand once. We'll file the judgment, she said. Expect noise. Ignore it. If anything, ask. Elates, call me first. The police second. In that order. Noise arrived faster than flowers. A week later, the bell over the bakery door sounded, and my parents walked in together for the first time in years. My mother had chosen a voice that thought it sounded like mercy. Janice, honey, she said, stepping around the counter like familiarity is a master key. You can drop the C. Harsh as now, we can be a family again. Isaac has suffered enough. They had not cared when I was working 18-hour days and sleeping in butter. They had not cared when money walked out of my drawer in polite, round numbers. They had not cared when I spent nights building a binder so neat a judge might forgive me for being a woman who picked frosting over accounting, but consequences had made them remember. A biology, I wiped the counter, because clean surfaces remind me I am not in a dream. You only remember I'm your daughter when it benefits you, I said. The words were not hot. They were a temperature the room would have too. Except, I built this bakery without you. I survived Isaac's theft without you. I won that lawsuit without you. I can live the rest of my life without you too. You don't mean that. My mother whispered, the way people whisper when they want the room to collude. My father reached for an old authority. Where? Your parents. No, I said, because sometimes the shortest sentence does the heaviest work. Your Isaac's parents. You made that choice a long time ago. I walked them to the door. I didn't. O.T. hurry. Dignity has its own speed. I locked it behind them, turned the open sign back around, and went to the kitchen. There were wedding cupcakes to frost. The afternoon arranged itself into quiet. Tea, the kind that tastes like safety. I piped buttercream in, even spirals while the ovens ticked into cool. Peace is not dramatic. It is a room with the right light, and no one trying to rename your labor. The next morning, the line formed at 6:12. People wanted sourdough and small joys. I handed them over one by one, the register balancing like a well-rehearsed breath. Sometimes justice looks like paperwork and a judge's voice. Sometimes it looks like a till that closes with the exact weight it should have, a bell that rings only for customers, and a woman who no long flinches when she hears it. 3 years is a long time when you count it in early mornings. The clock still blinks for 12 a.m. when I swing my legs over the side of the bed. But what waits for? Emmy downstairs has changed. The first location we're into breathed so steadily that it began to hum a tune of growth. The second location opened in the neighboring town with a lease negotiated in my own voice and investors who backed a vision instead of a bloodline. I hired for full-time employees into part-timers, people whose wrists learn the memory of the dough the way a violinist knows where a note lives. We run on systems that look like kindness from the outside, scheduling that respects weekends, tip pools that don't punish the quiet, A training binder that starts with, "This is a place where we apologize to each other before we have." 2. The ledger isn't a cliff anymore. It's a slope you can walk without holding your breath. Success, when it's honest, S. Tops needing to announce itself, it moves like well-balanced breath. The line forms earlier, now 5:55 a.m., then 5:48. Then one morning a little boy in dinosaur pajamas waited with his dad at 5:32. And I brought them hot chocolate because sometimes the world does not need to be strict to be safe. Our signature sourdough has a waiting list on Fridays. Wedding season books months out. The gluten-free lemon bars age. They bullied their way into every PT meeting like polite rebels. The wall behind my desk at the original shop holds a framed newspaper feature about small business resilience, written by a reporter who asked real questions. What it costs to insure. Ovens. How many hours a day hands can work before they turn into something less than hands? What happens to a town when a storefront turns on? It's light at dawn and means it. I keep the article not because I need strangers to call me legitimate, but because it memorializes something larger than flour and sugar. It documents that a woman can turn what others call a hobby into a payroll, that a creative trait can carry a mortgage, that a life measured in attempts can become a structure that shelters more than one person. Somewhere between those paragraphs sits a ledger of invisible victories. The 6 a.m. regular who told us our sourdough got him through chemo when nothing tasted right. The teenager who takes the early shift for school because the smell of cinnamon makes the rest of the day survivable. The delivery driver who says our lobby is the only place he gets to feel human on a route that treats him like a barcode. I will be asked quietly, sometimes with a grimace, for permission about Isaac and my parents. Small towns do not forget, they archive. Isaac moved to towns over 6 months after the ruling. The restraining order did not make him a myth. It made him a man with a boundary. News travels at the speed of pies in communities like ours. Everyone knows he tried to take his sister's bakery and got caught, and gossip, for once, leaned in the right direction. He found work at another auto shop. I do not wish him hunger. I wish him a ledger that finally teaches him what labor is. As for my parents, they drive by sometimes. I have seen their car slow at the curb, the way people slow at accident sites even when there is nothing left to see. They do not come in. I no longer practice speeches in my head for the day they go. There are mornings the ache surprises me, that primal bruise where daughterhood used to be, but it passes in the way weather passes when your house is properly built. Here is the philosophy I promise. The sweetest revenge is not the courtroom's gavel. It is irrelevance achieved by living well. If you wait for an apology to serve as your permission slip, you will die in the waiting room. If you keep asking the jury you were born into to recognize your work, you will forget what your hands can do without their vote. At some point, you must decide whose language you will speak. I chose the grammar of ovens and contracts, of boundaries and binders, of a community that pays with cash and gratitude instead of critique. RNS out. You can love a river and still decide not to let it carry you away. Sometimes people message me to ask for advice because their family doesn't understand their silly dream. They want a blueprint. I tell them recipes aren't maps. They're agreements with heat. But I share what I learned, the way a neighbor shares starter. File the paperwork early. Put your name on what you build. Keep receipts even when it feels obsessive. When someone calls your skill a hobby, ask them to define payroll. When someone says family, ask them whether they mean love or leave. Rage, believe the math and your body in equal measure the pause log, and the way your stomach tightens when a boundary is crossed. And if you must fight, do it with evidence, not volume. Rage adds heat. Proof add. Destructure. I have a corkboard in my office with 3 index cards pinned to it. On the first, ingredients, measurements, timing. On the second, paper is scaffolding. On the THI. RD. Build a life that does not argue back, just exists undeniably. When the noise outside spikes an online rumor, a cousin's sideways comment at the grocery store, the occasional anonymous review tea. Hat reads like a family member trying on a fake name. I look at the cars. Then I go downstairs and do the work that persuaded the morning to come back again. If you've stayed this long, I want to say this. Plainly, thank you. Thank you for letting a stranger's kitchen become a place inside your head. Thank you for the messages that arrived after the court day. The ones that said, I believed you. And the ones that said, I didn't think I could choose myself until you did. I wish you good health, the kind that lets you sleep and wake without fear. I wish your family happiness, whether it is the one you were given or the one you built from friends, co-workers, and the guy who knows exactly how you like your coffee. If your dream has been called cute, I wish you the strength to make it Dora. Well, if the people you love try to rename your labor as something they can manage, I wish you the clarity to rename yourself as owner. Every morning when I unlock the door, the bell rings in a pitch I have come to think of as permission. I breathe in the first loaf's quiet steam and remember the girl who spoke to yeast like it might love her back if she was patient. I think she would be proud of what we built, not just the bakery, but the boundary around it, not just the sales, but the jobs that turned other people's mornings into wages. Not just the victory, but tea. He decision to stop submitting my worth to a jury that never learned my language. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever had to pick yourself over a script other people wrote for you, tell me about it in the comments. The more we say these things aloud, the fewer daughters will mistake doubt for guidance. And if you want more stories like this about justice, betrayal, and the ordinary miracle of building something beautiful from nothing, please subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it keeps the ovens warm. Be well. May your home be safe, your table crowded with people who see you clearly, and your morning scented with whatever hope you're learning to be.